Well, good evening to you, Professor Jen here, doing a little taping this evening for you. Just finishing up our series, really. It's just a matter of another several tapings for me. I'll certainly miss our time together talking about all these topics as it relates to pop culture, why it is that we tell the same stories over and over again, how particular aspects of pop culture do influence us, why we have been influenced, why things become iconic, why things really seem to be culturally relevant, society, etc., over time, periods of time, decades. And of course, always thank you to Captioning Services, who does all the greatest things for me, and in such a timely manner, I never have to be concerned. So I'm always very appreciative. Anyhow, you see, I have this little picture up this evening. This might be a good time for all of you to slick your hair back and get your disco shoes out. Maybe not. I have a little picture up here, Saturday Night Fever, iconic, has an awful lot to do with pop culture and really the whole revolution in the 1970s of fashion. I can do this for us on many levels: fashion, relationships between men and women, relationships between men as friends, relationships between socioeconomic levels, people that wish to level up. Uh, Really, this film really revolutionized so many topics in pop culture. Still today, people often reference this film and the variety of topics that this film did cover, in addition to, entertaining, revolutionizing a whole era of entertainment, a whole era of dance. It was a magical time in this film because the film, not really from the very beginning, many people just really didn't see it until the academicians uh, started sorting out details of this film to realize that this was a film that was really trying to engage us and help us understand how it is that men grow and men think. And really, is a film about really men's studies. How do you like that? A film about men's studies from the 1970s. You say, well, what did that look like? Why was it so important? We had this character, Tony Manero, who's 19 years old and who's just really stuck, stuck sort of like we see in Shakespeare's characters. Just to go back a little from the beginning of this class, what is the role of man? How does man grow? How does man respond? How does man have emotions? Who does men consort with? How is a man respected? How does a man respect himself? And all of these questions that really come into shaping, particular roles, societal norms, etc., how people see themselves, let's say, in the role and gender of a man. And so this film really spent an hour and a half doing that. Many people didn't see the depth of this film, but the film every now and then uh it sort of has a resurgence of interest, not only for the fashion, the music, but the fact that really this character, Tony Manero, we've seen him before. We've seen this story before. We've seen these references in the film. The character Tony, they this woman that he decides to dance with, who's also his age, 19, 20 years old, she really has no romantic interest in him, and she's trying to come to a place in the film with him and her character, which is very important. But she's trying to say, I have no love interest in you. I will never have any love interest in you. I have no interest in sleeping with you, right? I have no interest in having sex with you. I have no interest in being a love interest with you, but I would like us to be friends. Now, this was an aspect of relationship that we just really didn't see in literary and cultural studies throughout time. We never really had it put to us, especially in motion picture, where two persons of the same age, from the same neighborhood, you know, opposite sex could be just friends, could be sort of partners in friendship, have each other's back emotionally, etc. Give each other advice, be kind to one another without any kind of sexual intimacy whatsoever. The 1970s was such an interesting time in film and media. It's so rare. I've been thinking about this all weekend. It's so rare that men and women were really just friends in media, in film, as well as in television. And if they were friends, we had this very popular uh, show called The Mary Tyler Moore Show. It was about a young woman who had graduated college in the 1970s, and she was starting out in her professional career. And she does have male friends, but the exception is that they're never her age. They're sort of like a father figure. You see where I'm going with this? They're never her equal. They're never her equal regarding age, social class, economic class. They're always sort of in a mentoring position with her. So there was an example that I could bring to you that we hadn't seen this kind of idea before, that a man and a woman the same age could really just be friends with one another. And so throughout the film, Tony Manero and Saturday Night Fever, he struggles because he's never been friends with a girl. He doesn't even know how to be friends with a girl. And through the whole film, there's this constant struggle between his emotions, his sexuality, his ability to relate to his female friend. Yet we see him with all these other women throughout the film. And he has a hard time with everybody because why? He's trying to grow into himself. He tries to speak with his mother, and he tries to speak with a former dance partner who's also a female who would like to have intimate relations with him. And he just can't seem to feel grounded. I think to myself, this is such a very important story to tell. Now, we didn't tell it very often pre-1970s in film, in television, media, etc. But we do tell it since then. We tell it in so many different ways. I can think of so many characters that we see in print as well as we see in film, television, where a man will say, I don't wish to be this sexual partner. I don't wish to have romantic sexual intimacy. And this also goes, of course, for our persons that might be interested in having same-sex relationships, that might be gay. We have a whole new category where I think since the 1970s, we've seen the idea of the man, grow in so many ways that he's not just this person who wants to conquer, have sexual conquer, have a phrase so many of you have taught me over the years, have body count. I never really knew that phrase as it related to sexual activity. But certainly it's an important character because for a very long time in media, in film, men were really just portrayed in a variety of ways, either very rough and tumble, or men were portrayed as strong and silent, or always had to be the victor, always had to win over the gal, always had to be the savior, the rescuer, and just could never just really be terribly emotional with self, with other characters, etc. And so this film sort of opened the door for so many other films. I think I might have referenced once before in this course. If I haven't, it's okay. I'll reference it again now. The Prince of Tides. Prince of Tides was another film, of course, not only iconic, but really influenced pop culture because it was really a film about a man who is admitting that he was sexually abused and sexually assaulted. And his whole life as an adult male this happened to him as a child. As an adult male, he never like really knew where he stood with anybody because why? He never really understood where he stood with himself. And so the film is Prince of Tides is really an exploration into self. When the film comes to an end, we find that the character in Prince of Tides, he's able to admit what happened to him. The whole film takes us from this place where he spent so much of his adulthood running from what had happened to him in victimization. And sort of at the end of the film, he finds his power, he finds his voice, and it really becomes a turnkey for so many other issues for men and in pop culture. There were so many articles that came out after The Prince of Tides, as well as this particular film, Saturday Night Fever, that talked about men really as emotional beings, men that have also been terribly victimized, either sexually, socially, economically, not understanding their role within cultural context or within their own societies and with themselves. This constant sort of, you know, distress, not feeling at ease with oneself. And in the 1970s, it really fueled an entire, really media storm, many articles, many men. All of a sudden, we started seeing men on talk shows talking about themselves. I mean, it's just something we didn't see. In the land of talk shows, which I guess was really, the very beginning of reality TV other than game shows, men would get up and talk about brawn. They would talk about tough things. They would talk about, heavy things, political things. And then women on talk shows, they would talk about the softer side of things. They would talk about emotions and victimization and awful lot of sadness and things that had to do with very serious social emotional issues. But when these films came out, especially Saturday Night Fever, Prince of Tides, uh, men sort of had the door open for them that they could talk about all of these very sincere emotions, very heavy emotions, and start to do really heavy lifting when it came to talking about self and talking about constructs, talking about how we see men, etc. And it really gave us a different perspective. It let us open a door. Where else reminds me of? I'm thinking, to myself as I tape this for you, as if we're in a conversation with one another. I'm thinking Lord of the Flies. Remember the book, Lord of the Flies? Really all male construct. Everybody's trying to figure out who's weak, who's strong. You remember it, I'm sure. You know, uh, who's going to survive, who isn't going to survive, who cries, who doesn't cry, and this whole sort of microcosm of people trying to figure out who's going to win, who's going to lose, who's going to die, who's going to survive. That kind of survivalism from the emotional perspective. I'll tell you where else I see it. I think of it too in definitely um, Grapes of Wrath. I'm thinking out loud again. This whole idea of, strength and brawn and virility and never really showing, sadness, never really showing, weakness. I think about it often too, now that I'm on it with you. I'm thinking about Catcher in the Rye. Maybe you read that one, again, really put us in a place where we start talking about Holden Caulfield, the vulnerability of this young guy, how he sees his sister Phoebe, how he sees the world. He's trying to make sense of sex, he's trying to make sense of emotion, his friends, adults, hypocrites, politics, all of these things, really coming into self, really trying to explore, have self-exploration. So I think that again, the 1970s came in really fast and furious, and it really gave us these different perspectives of how it is that men think and how it is that men see themselves. In the film Saturday Night Fever, there's this one part, I'm paraphrasing, where it's really very painful. I watched it as a teenager. I watched it in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, my 60s. I always watch it when it comes on. And there's this one part where Tony Manero, 19 years old, his dance partner. I don't know what's gotten up her craw that day. I still don't know what possesses her to say it to him, but he seems to be getting on her nerves because she wants to socially advance. She wants to go from one neighborhood and advance to another neighborhood that's better economically suited for her needs, has different tastes that are probably more sophisticated than where she's coming from. And she looks him in the eye on the big screen, right? And she says, "You're nothing but a cliche." Ooh, powerful. I remember when I heard that the first time in the movie theater, the whole audience had just sort of hushed. And it became an iconic part of culture when people then in the 1970s, you would hear teenagers say to one another, sort of like the saying so many people have, "That's so 5 minutes ago," something like that. People would say, "You're just a cliche." But it was really so painful that she delivered this to him, to this character. But it sort of sets him on his heels. It sort of uh, pivots him. I guess that's a good word. He pivots. He hears this, that he's a cliche, and he takes it to heart. And all of a sudden, he wants to make all these rapid changes that he sees his dance partner making because he too finds himself in a situation where he realizes he has to move on at 19. He has to move forward with his life because if he doesn't, he's going to stay stagnant. And this was really such an important theme, especially for men in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, that you didn't have to be who somebody told you were going to be. You didn't have to apprentice into your father's footsteps. You didn't have to be the victor and inherit the business. You didn't have to go to college and be who somebody else told you to be. You didn't have to keep friends that you were clearly outgrowing. This film also put us into this new place where it was sort of a primer in a way, teaching young men 19 that you can leave your neighborhood and you can leave your friends and you can wish them well. But if you feel you have to, for self-preservation, move on, then go ahead and do that. So the film also, in telling a story, right? Why do we tell the same stories all over again? And why are some stories, here's a good question, why are some stories so much more important than others? This story that I'm telling you, Saturday Night Fever, why is this important story retold since the 1970s in a variety of characters? Because sometimes, I'll close with this thought, sometimes all of us, men, women, non-binary, gay, lesbian, LGBTQ, okay? All of us, part of the human condition, sometimes we feel we need permission to move on with our lives. Sometimes maybe we feel we need permission to cease friendships, right? We outgrow things. It's okay. You know, I saw this interesting saying, just because we're not talking doesn't mean we're beefing. Sometimes I wish you well. It's just I gotta go. You have to go. We have to go to different places in the world. I think about the same story we hear over and over again, at the end of high school. Some of you might know this story, right? You might have lived it, you've seen it in other people. And people spent 3, 4 years in high school, depending where they went, however long, whether it's ninth or 10th grade, I don't know. But they spent all these years making all these friendships, partnerships and alliances, we could say, associates. But all these friendships we think that are going to last forever. We go off to college, we do our best to stay in touch. And we just go through life. Sometimes we stay in touch, sometimes we don't. And we don't wish anybody ill. It's not that we're severing things because we're mad. It's just that we have new experiences. We have different mountains to climb. We have different experiences, friendships to forge. And it's just we need to sometimes cut little pieces off of who we used to be because we can't take all that with us. I saw this interesting little sort of reel, I guess you could say it was, clip, on a social format. And it was just this train. I'm describing it to you. It was this train, and the voice said in the background of this train, we're all on this train for a temporary ride. We don't know when we're getting on. We don't know when we're getting off. We don't know who we're going to meet. Some of us are going to get on the train late. Some of us are going to leave prematurely early. But life is really this train. We have to make all these changes. We have to make all these maneuvers. Maybe this is why we tell so many of the same stories, that sometimes we have to lose a little piece of us along the way so we can sort of make room for the new pieces of us, right? We can't just keep putting stuff in a backpack and carrying the backpack. It's to the point where we can't fit anything new in the backpack. Sometimes we have to let go of things in order to transition. And I'll use the word again, pivot into the next place. So again, let me wrap up for you. Always a pleasure to be with you. I'm thinking to myself, why were these stories in the 1970s so important? And the texts that I referenced from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, why so important? Because we started to tell newer stories. We started to reshape, reform how it is that we saw the male figure, how it is that we saw the male psyche, the male persona, right? And how it is that we're really sort of saying and giving permission to all persons, because it's a human experience, being able to change. Like when we have relationships, people say, well, you've changed, you're not the same person you were before. No, but people are entitled to change. That's why this story and stories like it are so very important. And we see it thematically and all of these, binge watching shows that we see on Netflix, episode series shows, where we see characters today that develop and morph into something that they didn't start, that the ending sometimes of a character persona looks nothing like the persona when they began, from whence they came. And that's okay too. That's a great thing to see metamorphosis, transition. I love it personally. Some people might be very uncomfortable with the idea that we do have to accept change, that we do have to accept change within ourselves. We're not the same person that we were last year. We're always gathering new skills, always gathering new information. I think it's just that in the last 50 years or so, we got very comfortable discussing these nuances, that we don't have to hold on for survival to old relationships and old alliances. We can be anew. So I'll leave you with that. If you ever have time to see this film, it's on every now and then. Certainly entertaining. I'll give you that. Certainly interesting to see fashion of the time, etc., music, sociability, how it is that people your age, consorted and met with one another. What's the word phrase today? Hooked up, right? Hooked up without social media, without platforms, without texting, sexting, and everything else. But it's a different time and place. I hope you enjoy my little coffee table series chat with you this evening. I wish you well always. Tonight we had really a dynamic rainstorm here. It's Sunday night, the night really before we come back to school. I'm thinking it's March 16th, 2025. We had quite a storm. I was waiting to see Dorothy, Toto, the Tin Man fly down the street. And maybe we'd all be back in Kansas. Okay, my dears, I will see you shortly sometime, one of these days. Enjoy your evening and always be blessed. Good night to you.